Good afternoon, everybody. So I will give you an overview of our thinking at CEA for I/O evolution and, in our computing centers. So first, I want to just to make you a short summary of the history of storage we have on our site. So last century, long time ago, we had a compute system. We were very simple. It was a few Cray machine, single operating system with a front-end machine to access it. And the storage system was directly connected to the machine. The tape, the robot, the disk, everything was in a single system, single operating system, and easy to use and very simple to program, we could say. So after early 2000 up to now, we are in the era of homogeneous clusters. So you see on this slide you have three generations of these clusters and the evolution of storage between these three systems. So the first one, we had fast local storage in a parallel file system, which was a proprietary parallel file system. And we already have shared storage between the supercomputer and post-processing systems or other computers, which were on parallel tapes in an HSM, because at this time it was too expensive to have on disk, and tapes was too slow. So we had to use parallel, we have to stripe files over tapes. And we had a capacity storage on large tapes. A few years later, we had we had still a fast local parallel file system, but at this time we were moving to an open source parallel file system because we were not very happy with the first one. And the advantage of having an open source file system was not only having the sources, but also having a community with you. And so we were able to share the issue and to debug the issue all together, and not only with a single vendor, which at some time did not have a machine large enough to reproduce the bug. The fast share storage moved to disk, but still in HSM. And the capacity storage was in large tapes in the HSM also. So HSM is a hierarchical storage management, so it's a software that moves data from different levels. And the last generation, the third generation, we have our local parallel file system, the same. We move the shared data to storage to a parallel file system, which is the same, but implemented differently, globally on the computing center. And the global storage is on large tape, only in HSM. So the HSM now is only managing kind of archive, no live data. So to the architecture, we are in an heterogeneous dataless cluster. So this is what we have today for Cobalt, which is the new CCRT system we installed in TGCC recently, and Terra 1000. And this is also the architecture we plan for the next Tier 0 system we will install, we hope, this year. So we have multi-usage clusters. That's a big evolution we had since a few years now, that now our computing center are doing simulation and also data analysis. We are not only producing data from simulation, but also we receive data from outside, and we are post-processing, we are analyzing data, and we generate new data. We send it outside with our computing centers. A large change also is that we move to heterogeneous compute resources. So we have today classic Xeon. We also have Xeon Phi and GPU. And we are ready to integrate a new type of processors, which can be ARM processors or something else. Another about storage, We have dataless clusters, so now all the storage, even the remote, even the dedicated parallel file system is out of the machine. So now all the storage is in a central place on the computing center. And even if it's still dedicated, some part of the file system is dedicated to a computer, the computer is not attached directly to the storage through, for example, these MPI networks. Everything is accessed through, so in our case, it's Lustre routers, but it also can be TCP IP gateway or other type of gateway. So today architecture you have here, it's a summary. So you have the heterogeneous compute and analysis resources, a high performance network, which now it's an InfiniBand network we are using for that. Connected to the storage, to the big file system clusters, also connected to tapes. This network now is used for everything. So that means that we are using also to have TCP access from a remote machine. We have only a big, large InfiniBand network with Ethernet gateway, for example, because you cannot go with Ethernet over Renater, so we have to go with Ethernet, and we have some gateways to do that. And, but everything is in a single high-performance network. So what are the evolution we planned for 2020? So as you already know that, but I can also summary, what is an exascale computer? It will rely on a new architecture, mainly for the power consumption reason that we cannot, we can technically build an exascale computer today, but the power consumption will be so high that it will be crazy to pay the power. So for this new type of systems, what we introduce is a high level of different parallelism. So we have the vectorization, which is coming back. We have many threads, and also thousands and hundreds of thousands or millions of nodes. Another characteristic is a high number of cores per processor, which has the consequences that the ratio of memory usable per thread or per core will be much less than we have today. So that does not mean that we will have few memories on this node. We will have a large amount of memory of this node, but the level of cores or threads will be so high that at the end, the ratio of memory per core will be very small. And also another characteristic of this network is that we will of this system is that we will have a high-speed network. When you look at the roadmap of the different technology for the network, you find that you see that the bandwidth for a single line is very important, and sometimes maybe much more than what is needed if you have a single, for example, a case of KNL, if you have a single processor talking to a network. When you look at the roadmap, you can find that the network bandwidth available is too high for what you need practically. So the consequences of this point for the storage is that storage client memory fingerprint should be reduced. This is something that it's very classical, that a parallel file system or any file system, to be able to work efficiently, it needs buffer in the memory. So in fact, you write in memory, and after the system write back to the file system. So without memory, you are very slow on your classical file system. Another question we have is how the file system we have today will behave in the future. It's absolutely not sure that it will easily scale for different reasons. So what we push is we introduce a new IO architecture which is proxy-based because the petascale file system may not scale. For the first reason was the memory. The second reason is that the client parallelism may be too high, and the global parallelism will be also too high, which will make a big pressure on the distributed locking mechanism. So why do we need this? Today, because of the POSIX behavior, which require that you have an atomicity on many operations, all the file systems try to implement a distributed lock-in manager to be sure that if a node writes a single byte in a file, another node just the time after will see this last single byte and not the previous one. So to implement this, you implement distributed locking, and when you are talking about thousands of nodes, hundreds of thousands of nodes in a cluster, it's very challenging to make something scalable. And so the other point is that the parallelism on the client may be too high for the client of the file system. So the solution we implement is a CE-IO proxy. It's a homemade development. We still keep a POSIX compatible interface through the kernel access. We use a 9P file system from the client node to delegate IOs from the client to an IO proxy. So the advantage of this POSIX compliant is that it's transparent for the application. You do not have to rewrite your application with a new API. And we know that even if people are ready to make change in their code to take advantage of a new technology, if the first thing we say to them, okay, first you change your code and after we will see the advantage, we know it's not easy. So this, we will implement this 9P client in front of IO proxy to make this transparent. But we will still be able to have a native access from user space. So the client, if, for example, you have an MPI-IO or FJ5 library and you are ready to make the change, or someone else make the change to directly in 9P to our proxy IO, it will be available and you will be more efficient. So the advantage of this IO proxy solution is that it requires only a petascale file system, because the petascale file system is only seen by the IO proxy daemon nodes. So the scale of the cluster of IO proxy is much smaller. Another advantage is that it isolates jobs, because an IO proxy, you can dedicate an IO proxy to a job. So all the tasks from the job are talking to the same pool of IO proxies, and so there is a coherency, and you can have a shared cache effect, for example, on this IO proxy. Another advantage is for us, from a computing center point of view, with this IO proxy, we have a way to, I would say, to control what is doing the code on the IOs. Today, on the global file system, you have on our computing centers, a crazy application can really kill the system just going in a loop of IOs generating errors, and you can easily kill the metadata server or kill any IO nodes. With the IO proxy mechanism, in our case, we will just have to kill the IO proxy or to slow down the IO proxy, and the crazy application will not destroy all the computing center. So here you have a drawer of this architecture. So you find the IO proxy in the compute nodes, in the compute clusters. There is no fixed ratio between the application and the IO proxy. Typically, an application that need lots of IOs will have a few IO nodes in a few compute nodes in front of one IO proxy. Another one who needs less IO proxy can share more compute things in front of the IO proxy. And all this is going to the global storage through the high-speed network, so the network independent of the compute cluster. So now we will see how we'll evolve. We'll see the evolution of storage. So you already know that everybody have heard about flash memory. So flash memory is the new grail of storage. So it's fast, it's very nice. It's cheaper and cheaper, but it's still expensive. In fact, we have to notice that it's not, the production costs are decreasing, but in fact there is still a market of people who are ready to pay for flash. So the production costs are decreasing, but the sell cost is still expensive. But it's available in multiple form factors. So today you can have them in a DIMM form factor, so memory, like disk in SSD. But also we have started to see them from a network device with NVMe over Fabrics protocol. And this is one of the change we are seeing, that we could start to imagine to connect our storage devices directly on the network, and maybe to be also able to access to this network storage with a memory semantic. This is typically what is done through the PMIO API. So it's very nice, but in fact you see that it brings lots of problems, because now you have permanent memory. So when you say permanent, that means that when you have written something in it and you power off, power on, it's still there. That means that if you want to write 2 bytes and you need a coherency between these 2 bytes, you have to manage it from the application level now. Initially, when you write today in some memory, if you have this kind of issue and you have power off, power on, the memory is new, 0 everywhere. With this kind of memory, it's not true. So you have to manage all the coherency now from the application level, and it's not straightforward. The other things we are seeing on the storage market is the object storage clusters. So I took 2 examples from the one available today. It's the Miro from Seagate, which will be described in the Sage talk you have later, and also the WOS from DDN. And both are very good products, but they are proprietary products, so that means that it's closed, it's not open source product. So the evolution of object storage devices. So previously I said we had some kind of clusters of object storage. In this place I go back to something at a lower level. So the first experiment, it was very interesting, was the Seagate Kinetic Drive. So the idea from Seagate was to connect a disk with an internet interface. So it was physically a disk with a SATA connector. So the form factor was a SAS or SATA connector, but in fact it was an Ethernet signal. It implements a key-value store interface over TCP/IP. So it's a very nice idea. We experiment. It was very, very interesting to use it, but there is some issues. The first one is it's not open. So you have an interface which is an object-based interface, but it's completely closed. You have some function, and so this is a key store value. You can associate a value to a key and get after the value from the key. So that's very simple. But it's a little bit too limited. For example, you have a max size, it was, I don't remember, it was 1 meg or something like that. So your key and your block is only 1 meg. So in fact, you have to implement lots of things. You still have objects, but they are very small objects. And in fact, it's not going, I think, to evolve because it's too limited. So another approach is to say, okay, we can take the same idea, but instead of doing this connection in a mass market drive, just add an ARM processor or interposer in front of standard disk. Just put a little card at the back, and you have the same thing, but with an open architecture. And what has been done by OpenIO. OpenIO, it's a company, a French company, who made some software-defined storage, object-based storage. And here you have the products they have made. So you have here the disk, the little ARM processor connected to the disk. You put everything in a drawer, and you have this. So a cluster of independent disks connected through a nano node, which is an ARM card, to an Ethernet network with 4 gig switches, and you go out there. And on this, so they implement the OpenIO software, but you could imagine that on this kind of hardware, OpenIO is an open source software. It's running in Linux. So taking this ID, you put some nano node a little bit stronger, and you could imagine that you can start seeking to do, for example, some post-processing close to the disk, and bring new architecture and new ideas. So this is a very promising architecture. It's easy to plug on your computing center, and it's completely open. So what are the challenges for using this object storage? Because now we see that it's easy to plug, it's open source, it's nice. But in fact, there is a big difficulty that there is today no standard on the interface on how to use. You have some de facto standard, which is S3, for example, but you have no HPC standard. And so it's difficult to implement from application. The only example I know of a client which has an RDMA-based interface, it's a Miro from Seagate. So that means all the others, it's TCP/IP based. And we know the cost of TCP/IP on our client or compute machine. That's important. So it's not really HPC ready today in the mass market, not in case of Miro. And also, but we will still need for legacy access, even when we will put this kind of object storage appliance on the computing center, we will need a legacy access. And our plan is to use PNFS in our NFS homemade NFS server, which is Ganesha. And to do this, we have implemented libkv-ns library, which implement a tree namespace of a kValue store. So it's an open source project also that can help us in implementing a Ganesha over an object store, a kv namespace implemented in object store, which is this is done in the Sage project. And also we have a native access from object for the data. So coming back to the issue of the API to access object storage, our strategy is we are seeking to define our standard, because the strategy we have in our computing centers is to try to add as much as we can the differences to the code. So that allows us to make the backend evolve independently of the code, and that's good for the code, because the code will not have to follow all the change. It's what we have done for the libkv-ns, and we are seeking to do it for the data. So our strategy, as I said, is to hide as much as we can to the user. Even the storage hierarchy we have today, and we will continue to have in our computing centers. But if people want to access the native storage and to make the effort to port, it's not forbidden. It's just they take the risk to have to port when there will be an evolution. So as a conclusion, our storage architecture will evolve to a proxy-based architecture. So we have running prototypes today. We plan to do high-scale tests this year and next year on large systems we will have. We strongly believe that the storage building block will be object-based, because we think that we see that that will be the storage coming from the mass market. You can find in some cloud providers or all this kind of market, they are moving to this kind of interface. But storage, object storage by itself, it's not enough. We need to have it in appliance to be able to deploy in a high volume, and in distributed hierarchy of storage. And our usage model, always the same, legacy for the transition, and native to get high performance. And also we plan to have this MPIO or HDF5 interface that will hide to the code the evolution. And today in projects like Sage, we already have people working on implementing an API-IO HDF5 interface or object storage. The difficulty will be to do it in a generic manner. For example, HDF5 has already thinking to define some kind of object layer interface in their low-level interfaces. Okay.